Today's episode is one of my favorites. We will be examining and debunking the most ill-founded cultural, historical myths that you'll hear from the pro-gun control crowd regarding the legal, political aspects of gun ownership and all of their lies therein.
It's Gun Week continued. It's 4th of July week, and firearms are as American as apple pie, which I don't really know how American that is. They had apples back in the old country.
I think so.
We didn't invent apples. I don't know. We put it into a pie. But this is Mrgunsngear. You can go check out his YouTube channel, Mrgunsngear. It's incredibly helpful. A lot of good information there. But we wanted to take this opportunity. We've done Handguns 101,
Yep.
Long Guns 101,
Yep.
the most common firearm myths that you've probably heard. And we'll separate it into two parts, kind of cultural, political, and then technical, since that's more in your realm of expertise. And you've worked in the firearms industry, too, for a while.
Yeah, I've been doing this since 2014.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, we can separate the technical from sort of because sometimes people who work in the firearms industry, they're not always fully aware of the Second Amendment in the historical context.
Yeah, that's very common, actually.
Yeah, it kind of surprises.
More than it should be.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. But, look, we'll lead this with a clip for you. But right off the bat, we'll go through 7 and maybe +1 top firearms myths that you've probably heard, culturally, politically, historically, as well as the rebuttals to those. We'll make all the references publicly available, but it's no secret that half of this country at this moment in time is vehemently against the idea of owning firearms.
There is a way for us to make sure that lawful, responsible gun owners like yourself are able to use it for sporting, hunting, protecting yourself. But the only way we're going to do that is if we don't have a situation in which anything that is proposed is viewed as some tyrannical destruction of the Second Amendment.
Do you think that reinstating the ban on assault weapons and banning high-capacity magazines would do any good?
Yes, I do. We cannot let a minority of people, and that's what it is. It is a minority of people hold a viewpoint that terrorizes the majority of people.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
If you want to protect yourself, get a double-barrel shotgun. I said, Jill, if there's ever a problem, just walk out on the balcony here or walk out, put that double-barrel shotgun and fire 2 blasts outside the house. I promise you, who's ever coming in is not going to, you don't need an AR-15. It's harder to aim, it's harder to use, and in fact, you don't need 30 rounds to protect yourself. Buy a shotgun.
So it's not one of the myths here, but Mrgunsngear and I were just laughing. Mike, I'll call him Mike in case you guys get confused, at former Vice President Joe Biden saying, it's too hard to control AR-15. Use a double-barreled shotgun.
Yeah, that's definitely much harder to control.
It's incredibly difficult to control.
The AR-15 is hard to aim, is it? Yeah. With a red dot?
I mean, it really couldn't be easier, right? unless you're Elmer Fudd. So this brings us to 7 myths. So I think these are the ones that you'll most commonly encounter. Number 7, very common myth that you'll hear, that the Second Amendment, how often do we hear this, only applies to muskets. What's the truth? Nice little graphic there. Well, look, you know this better than probably I do, but historically the Founding Fathers were well aware of the technological advancements with firearms. And there were actually, at that point in time, many firearms that were far more advanced than the muskets that were used in the military, and it just wasn't cost effective.
Right. Or it was slower to reload, or there's different reasons they went with it. But yeah, there was semi-automatic air guns were very common in the period. And when you think of an air gun, a lot of people think of like a pellet gun, but these things were legitimately lethal guns that could be used for hunting, self-defense, war, whatever the case may be.
Right.
Additionally, there was volley guns, which had the capability to fire multiple projectiles. I mean, there was a ton of them.
Yeah, well, so to give you an example of a few of them, and you can check all of the references, there was the Kalthoff repeater, actually, which is one I wasn't super familiar with. In a previous video, I addressed sort of the Puckle gun, the pepper box revolver, there's the Belton flintlock, there's the flintlock machine gun, actually, and the Girandoni air rifle, which you may not know, that was an air gun that was used the Lewis and Clark expeditions. As a matter of fact, they used that high-capacity air rifle to showcase to all the Native Americans to say, hey, look how much more powerful our boom boom sticks are to bow and arrows. It was something that the government was aware of and actually encouraged to be used as a display piece.
Right.
So that's, and not to mention, of course, you would have to apply this same rationale to, well, the First Amendment does not apply to the printing press, let alone to your iPhone.
To the internet.
Right. And they were aware of all these technological advancements. These guns existed back then. They were high capacity. And let me give you one more truth that I think is pretty important, interesting. It also applied to cannons. So this is actually a private letter of marque in 1812 from James Madison to a privately owned ship to have cannons. They basically were saying, let me just sort of summarize this for you. They were saying, hey, we're coming into contact with, like British forces, and we're out here on our ship. We just want to make sure, is it okay for us to have cannons? And Madison said, Second Amendment, yeah, you can have cannons, which would be the equivalent to approximately maybe
like a javelin,
something today,
an AT-4, some kind of bunker busting weapon.
Yeah, it was a very heavy and by the way, you can also still have cannons.
Yes,
you can have them shipped to your house.
Today, as of right now, you can have huge cannons shipped to your house, and it's perfectly legal. There's no background check, nothing.
Okay, well, that's a conversation. I don't necessarily know that that's I guess, what are you going to use a cannon for?
Right. YouTube videos.
Yeah, exactly. If you have someone small enough to fire it, if you're working in the circus. But the point is, cannons back then, the letter I have commissioned the private armed brig called Prince Neufchatel, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, mounting 18 carriage guns. So this was something that, again, one of the founding fathers knew about, said, yeah, you can have cannons. Which brings us to another one, myth number 6 that you've probably run into. And this is remedial for a lot of you, but for a lot of folks, it isn't. They still encounter these, for example, if you're in high school. You'll still hear these myths touted on a consistent basis, that the Second Amendment is only for the militia. What part of your ass is part of a well-trained militia? We've heard that famous quote, right? Well, I think first we can read the Second Amendment.
Sure.
I think to start with that.
Yep.
And then sort of get into more historical context, the corroborating documents that clarify what constituted the militia. So here is the Second Amendment for people who haven't actually read it. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This was written pretty damn carefully, too.
It was. I don't think they thought it would ever be challenged like it has been, because it's so clear.
Right.
Like a regulated militia. Regulated means well run.
Right.
It doesn't mean regulated by the government.
Right. It means capable.
Correct.
And here's another truth, just to be clear. There are plenty of corroborating documents, right? If it's not just in the Constitution. Let's say the Constitution, right, and the Bill of Rights is the prescription. Well, then there are other corroborating documents that sort of add that, like, okay, hold on a second, this is just a prescription that's been written, but this is how you would take it, or this is what is most effective, or this is the tapering pattern. There are a lot of documents out there, and also conversations that were notarized, that would have been written down, that would corroborate this, and none to the opposite effect. So this is actually George Mason, one of the founding fathers, for those of you who don't know, when asked, well, what is the militia? He said, I ask, sir, what is the militia? It is the whole people. To disarm the people is the best and most effectual way to enslave them. So the right of the people, that's after. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people and to keep and bear arms. And George Mason said, well, what is a militia? Of course, it's the whole people. You are the militia. Any able-bodied, particularly able-bodied male who can carry a firearm is part of the militia, and you have the right to keep and bear arms.
Just don't tell the FBI.
Right, yes, exactly. I'm pretty sure everyone here is on a list, but we do it so you don't have to.
Correct.
This one is right in your wheelhouse.
Sure.
Myth number 5. Sure. And this one is silly, but you do hear this a lot, that a pistol brace makes a gun deadlier. And we didn't know if we should put this in the next installment on technical myths, but it's sort of pervasive culturally right now because of some of the laws that people are facing. So a pistol brace makes a gun deadlier.
You can buy the brace without a background check. But when it becomes a dangerous weapon, when that brace changes the gun's legal status and makes it, in essence, the same that caused a mass shooting at a Boulder, Colorado supermarket, the stabilizing brace made and a shorter barrel made a pistol under federal gun regulations.
It made it harder for people to buy stabilized braces. Put a pistol on a brace, it turns into a gun. Makes it more, you can have a higher caliber weapon, a higher caliber bullet coming out of that gun.
So
what's the truth?
So it doesn't change the deadliness, if you will, of it at all. If you look back at the history of the National Firearms Act, which is what prohibited short barrel rifles.
And which year was that?
1934.
1934, right.
It didn't prohibit them. You just had to get a tax stamp to have one. But the reason for that is they're trying to get rid of like gangster guns, if you will, sawed-off shotguns, things like that, things that were easily concealed. So the thing about it is, if you take an AR pistol and you remove the brace, it's actually smaller and easier to conceal than it is with the brace.
Right.
Additionally, brace pistols, like for ARs, just for this example, the reason people are putting a brace on them is because they have a barrel less than 16 inches. Well, with AR-15s, the amount of, lethality damage that the round is going to do is directly dependent on barrel length.
Right.
So they're putting them on guns with shorter barrels, therefore they're less lethal than it would be if you had a full-size rifle.
Right. And to be clear, the reason for that, for people who may not necessarily be super familiar with ballistics, is you have that powder burning, right? And the longer the barrel, every round kind of has an ideal length to sort of simplify it. And a lot of that powder is still burning, which accelerates the bullet, right? The round has the powder and the bullet is just the tip of it. Remember when you were young, you thought that whole thing was the bullet shooting out the gun? No, it's the tip, basically, at that neck of the round. That powder is still burning. And so unless with an AR, is it 16 inches is what's optimal?
No. So somewhere between 20 to 22 is about optimal, depending on the round and et cetera.
It's still pretty rare that you run into people with like 22-inch.
Yeah, almost never.
Almost never.
Almost never.
But you're losing a lot of that velocity in a shorter AR-15 that would be using a pistol brace.
Correct.
And that's when we've done the ballistics video, which you can go and watch. When people talk about that sort of wound channel from the AR-15, that directly relates to the speed, right? When you reach certain speed, that's where you create that hydrostatic shock, that sort of temporary wound cavity, which you wouldn't necessarily be running into sometimes in some scenarios with something that would have that short of a barrel. But really, a pistol brace was originally created for people who were compromised to be able to control a gun.
Correct. Effectively. Alex Bosco is the man who created it, the owner of SB Tactical, and he created it when he was with his friend who was a Marine veteran who couldn't use his AR-15 properly because he was injured, and they were actually kicked off the range because the range officer said they weren't being safe. So he created the brace as a way to increase the safety of the gun, literally.
So why is this such a big issue right now? Before we go into myth number 4, why has it become an issue now where they're saying we got to get rid of the laws that we're looking at, pistol braces?
Sure. So the reason is it's because they become so popular and so pervasive. So the estimates are that there's anywhere between 10 to 40 million of them out there, and they've only been around since 2012. So if you think about that many firearms in that period, I mean, that's a sizable number of guns that have been sold since 2012. And they're very popular because it just helps a lot of things. For example, I took a new shooter out to the range the other day, a female who hadn't shot guns before, and I gave her a 16-inch AR-9. And she said, oh, it would be so much nicer if it wasn't so heavy out front and had a little bit of a shorter barrel. Well, that's what the pistol brace enables people to choose. Right. And unfortunately, they're trying to take that away. But it's also simply, like I said, because they become so popular.
And that's another thing. We haven't addressed this specifically, but if you even look at the Assault Weapons Ban Act, right, a lot of these sort of, I guess you should say, characteristics of the firearms that make them are entirely arbitrary. For example, if in some cases, it's if the gun has any of these two characteristics, for example, if it has a buttstock, and then if it has a conspicuously protruding vertical grip, well, hold on a second. Well, who defines conspicuously? That's the term that defines it versus, I guess, inconspicuously. It's okay, the pistol grip on a pistol, but on a rifle, this is okay. This is now an assault weapon. Okay? Assault weapon. Sure. And I know you think I'm being reductive. That's actually true.
It's absolutely true. The ATF has actually issued letters from their Fat D division, which is their division that I guess makes rules, doesn't make rules, clarifies rules, whatever they claim that day. Yeah. But they have issued letters stating exactly what you just said in writing for public consumption. So yeah, he's not making that up.
Which brings us to myth number 4 here. This is one we just talked about, the Assault Weapons Ban Act that happened under Clinton, and obviously it just lapsed because even the left realized this didn't really do anything. It wasn't very effective, and there was backlash. Myth number 4 that you'll hear a lot is assault weapons need to be banned because they're the preferred weapons of mass murder. Now, before we even get into that and why it's not true, this is the problem with a myth that starts off with a false premise and the people perpetuating it know it. Assault weapon doesn't really mean anything, just to be clear. Assault rifle was a term that was used, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, in the military that had select fire, meaning it could be change from semi-automatic to a fully automatic, what you might consider machine gun. That's an assault rifle.
Right.
Assault weapon just means weapons that may be scary looking to someone who doesn't know about guns.
Correct. There's been at least 2 assault rifles like that were real things. The Mrgunsngear that the Germans used literally translates to assault rifle. And then Bushmaster made one that they marketed in the probably late 80s, early 90s that was called the assault rifle as well.
Right.
So yeah, outside of those, there's no assault rifles.
Right. And then the term assault weapons is even more. It just means whatever we don't like today.
Right. It means it's black and scary looking.
Yes, exactly. Pistol grip, no. Rifle grip, fine. Vertical foregrip, no. Right. If it's slightly angled, it's not an assault weapon anymore.
Magic.
So that's the premise. Just deconstruct that. If someone says assault weapon, they're a silly goose. You can tell them so. But let's go with what we think they mean. When they say assault weapon, they're probably talking about something that's like an AR-15.
Or an AK-47 variant.
A semi-automatic
variant, right.
Rifle variant. Okay. Here's the truth. In 2020, rifles themselves, this would include all rifles, they were responsible for 408 murders. That's 3% of all firearm murders. And when they try and say that the AR-15, these are the guns of mass shooters, it's their weapon of choice, 77% of, it's still surprising me when 77% of mass shooters used handguns.
Yep. I mean, that's true across the board. A lot of the most famous ones, Virginia Tech for one, 9mm and 22 pistols, both.
Right. Yeah. And it's one of those things where sometimes they'll have something that could be considered an assault weapon,
right, but
they'll actually fire more from a pistol, or for example, pistol carbine, I believe in
Nashville.
Yeah.
Which was crazy. Yeah. She used a Kel-Tec Sub 2000 to actually do the shooting, but she had a braced AR-15 pistol that would have been possibly worse for folks involved, I guess, but she didn't choose to use it, thankfully.
Right.
In
that instance. But used a Kel-Tec.
Of all things.
I know, of all things.
Gross.
It's gross. So this brings us to myth. Sorry, Kel-Tec. I'm sure you have some good things. Myth number 3, and this is one we've addressed on the show. I believe we have a clip. But again, it's a lie, and it's an agreed upon lie from half of the people in power in this country. They know that it's not true. And that myth is that guns, and you'll hear this on CNN, you'll hear it everywhere. I want you to remember this. Check the references I make available. It is not true. Guns are the leading cause of death amongst children.
And according to the CDC, the #1 cause of death for children ages 1 to 19 in this country is gun-related violence. Data from the University of Michigan also shows gun violence increased dramatically from 2020 to 2021.
Okay, here's the truth. And then I'll point out something really silly with that clip that you just saw. The leading cause of death among children ages 1 to 14, accidents, just to be clear. Now, where else do you ever hear children's ages 1 through 19? You cannot find me a board game that says ages 1 through 19. Find me a show that is made for children ages 1 through 19. We usually have 1 and up, which may mean 1 to 4, 4 and up, right? PG-13. Nowhere else do we include a demographic that 1 through 19, which, by the way, includes legal adults and people who can be tried as legal adults. We don't do that anywhere else. We only do it here so that we can cheat those numbers. We can lie about those numbers. So the #1 cause of death, to be clear, 1 to 14 years old, which is still a pretty wide spectrum,
right,
is accidents. Now, the study that these gun control advocates are actually using, it defines kids, again, up to 19 years old. 85% of those children killed by guns in 2019 were in that 15 to 19-year-old range. Now, you change that, where you change the number in the study to men and boys, the number gets even smaller. When you classify by race, ethnicity, and criminal background, that number gets even smaller. And here's the problem with this. You put people at risk, at danger. What if people have a pool?
Right.
But they're thinking, well, the #1 killer is guns. It's not even close. The pool, the bathtub, your toaster is more dangerous to your 4-year-old child than the gun in a safe in your closet.
It's not even close, especially the pool one. I've had people who want to come over to my house with their kids, and they'll be like, people have said to them, rather, oh, he has guns in the house, be careful with your kids over there. Well, I also have a pool. Mm-hmm. No one ever says that. No one's ever like, he has a pool, be careful bringing your kids over there.
Right.
I never get that feedback.
Which, well, I would assume because you don't have kids at your own, you probably don't have a fence around it.
The pool?
Yeah.
We have to. I believe it's law.
Is it law?
I believe so.
Okay, it's not law in every state,
Okay.
but I won't let my kids go to your place if you don't have a fence.
Right.
Yeah. You can, you can leave the guns strewn about the floor.
But the pool is by far more dangerous.
Pool, bathtub,
trampoline.
It's one of those things that it's a lie that's repeated often enough. You've heard that old adage, but I'd like for you to think of it a different way. It's an agreed upon lie. Do you believe that former Vice President Joe Biden doesn't have access to these statistics? Do you believe that Barack Obama doesn't know better? Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi? Do you believe that they actually think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds are at greater risk of being killed by a firearm than common accidents, than automobile accidents, than common household items? Of course they don't. Don't fall victim to an agreed upon lie just because enough people agree on it. Which brings us to myth. This one's always fun. Myth number 2. You hear this a lot.
You do. Is
that if you have a firearm in your house, you're more likely to have it used against you, right? Here's the truth. No.
That is the truth.
That is the truth. That's just not true. But they cite one study, which we'll make available, and it's flawed in a multitude of ways. Everybody in the study, just to be clear, had already been shot. So that matters because you're starting the sample pool with people who've already been shot. You're excluded from the study
if you haven't
been shot.
Correct.
And that matters because some people estimate the vast majority, but at least on the lowest estimate, half of all defensive firearm uses don't require a single shot fired.
Right.
Simply the presence of a firearm.
It's definitely higher than half.
Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to be generous to the people. So I saw some that's only half, but what would you estimate it is?
Probably 90% or higher.
Yeah, exactly.
Easily.
Yeah, it's a very strong deterrent. Just like how many times, do you hear about a guard dog mauling somebody? It's pretty rare.
Right.
They know there's a guard dog, they move on.
Correct.
That's why I always say, as much as I love firearms, get a dog first. If you're looking to keep your house safe, you should have security system, and a dog is one of the greatest deterrents. It's your eyes and ears when, if you're blind, deaf, and dumb. I mean, I don't know. Helen Keller may need a guard dog, but the point is firearms are important, but it's not the panacea. But
just one note on this. So this is back in the 90s. Oprah did a show on this topic,
right,
saying it was more dangerous to have guns in your house. My grandparents had World War II bringbacks, like historically significant guns. My grandfather got put in the hospital with an infection. And so my grandmother, when he was in the hospital, sold all of his World War II bringback guns and didn't tell him. And now we don't have them.
What?
So, yes, for real. It sold them off for $200.
He was fooled by Oprah?
Yes, she was fooled by Oprah.
Oh my God.
But unfortunately now our family doesn't have those firearms that are, historically significant because of this stupid myth.
Well, the good Lord giveth, and then take, in your case, he taketh away.
Yes,
but I told you about the 3 World War II era firearms that I found in the attic in my house.
Yes.
I found an old Colt Woodsman, and then whatever, I think it's a Beretta, that's a 25 caliber, and then another Colt that was from the 1930s. Now here's the thing. It was in a crawl space that was newly built. So it's not like it was old. And I asked the construction workers, is this your fire? I asked everyone I knew.
Right.
I said, no. So I found 3 firearms that are between the years 1934 and I think 1942. So maybe they were your grandfather's.
They might have been. They might have made their way.
He's like the tooth fairy,
right,
with guns. Here's something else, by the way, in this study, and I highly recommend you go and check it out because the method, it's so flawed. The sort of the criteria they use is they use interviews with police and medical examiners, right? So a lot of this is reported on by third parties. And here's how the case participants were defined. Also, by the way, it doesn't take into account firearm training at all. So this is a study that includes only people who've been shot right away, or you don't make the study. And then you're basing the study on commentary from police officers, from medical examiners. These people may have not had any firearm training whatsoever. And here's a quote as far as how the case participants were defined. We coded control participants as in possession if they reported any guns in a holster they were wearing, okay, in a pocket or waistband, okay, in a nearby vehicle, or in another place, quickly available and ready to fire at the time of their matched cases shooting. Okay, so I'll give them waistband, holster, vehicle.
Maybe.
If the altercation took place in the vehicle, it doesn't really matter if you're in your living room, or other place that could be quickly available and ready to fire. And that's not clearly defined. This is one study that is so immensely flawed. Anyone who cites it, again, it's an agreed upon lie.
Right.
Also, here's something else to take into account. There could be some truth to it. For example, I was saying, well, if you're going to say that you're more likely to ever be involved with an accidental discharge if you handle a gun than if you've never touched a gun.
Absolutely true.
That's true.
Yep.
Just like you're more likely to drown if you ever enter a pool. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody who is a competitive swimmer is more likely to drown than someone who's never swum before in their life, right? The moment that you use that pool and your level of experience plays a huge significance in the danger factor.
Right, and the same is true with somebody who's proficient with firearms.
Right.
Same.
I mean, basics. By the way, it's not that hard to make sure that you don't do something unsafe with a firearm. It doesn't take that long. And then, of course, you train it up as best as you can. All right, this brings us to myth number 1. And it was hard to pick number 1. And we'll do the technical issues. That's pretty fun because that's really his realm of expertise.
Sure.
I'm a caveman when it comes to that. I usually just throw my firearm.
It's a technique where you just reach it out
throw it
and do this when you shoot.
If I have a home
Adds a
intruder,
little velocity.
the bullet is more likely to hit them in the cylinder than it is to actually be used as a projectile. But the number 1 myth, you hear this a lot, is nobody needs a high-capacity magazine.
There's no reason someone needs a weapon of war with 100 rounds, 100 bullets that can be fired from that weapon. Nobody needs that. Nobody needs that.
You just heard former Vice President Joe Biden, that clip early on, say, no one needs that. Just get a shotgun. Fire 2 rounds. Again, I don't know how he can be all places at all times and know that that's what you would need. But even going with that, again, most defensive uses of firearms, okay, don't involve the weapon being discharged at all.
Yep.
I want to be clear about that. Now, when you get to the point where you're in a gunfight, meaning there's an exchange of gunfire, or you have to use your firearm, that number changes dramatically. So the stats are skewed with defensive uses of firearms, 0 shots, right, and then any shots, and the number is significantly higher than you may anticipate. And to be clear, this number can be argued. It's not always necessarily clear because the way that people study gun violence isn't always very accurate, and it's often politicized. But the total average number of shots that we see, according to the crime data that's available, that would be considered reputable, to stop an assailant is around 12. Now, let me explain to you why that is. The average number of hits to incapacitate a shooter is about 2.45. That's what they average it out to. The number of shots that actually hit the assailant are 1 out of 5, meaning 4 out of 5 tend to miss. That's something that a lot of people don't take into account. So if you take 5 and you multiply it by 2.45, you end up with 12.25 shots on average. Now, let's say that could be anywhere between 5 and 12. Let's say it's between 3 and 10. The point is, the top end of that, with 1 assailant, if you're missing 1 out of 5, which is probably the most clear statistic we have, puts you well beyond the idea of a double-barreled shotgun.
Right, and then you have 3 guys that kick in your door.
Yes, and that is something too. The number of assailants specifically involved in home invasions have gone up. And this is one of the, you can look at the statistics, or of course, you know what you've experienced, and you can believe your lying eyes and ears.
This is exclusive video caught on security cameras in the area where a St. Louis County woman was shot and killed from bullets started flying outside her home. As you can see, someone turns around in a yard and fires shots right at someone, and then that person returns fire. Bomarita Automotive Group Skyfox was over the scene in the 300 block of Lanshire Road in North St. Louis County, where the tragedy all unfolded around 3 Tuesday morning. In the video, it appears multiple people were exchanging gunfire from outside the victim's home on the front yard. We are told the woman was inside the home.
Terrifying moments caught on camera as a Phoenix homeowner protects themselves from several suspects trying to break in.
The Phoenix Police Department released this surveillance video tonight. You can see 4 men kicking in a front door only to be met by gunfire from the homeowner. That homeowner says they were alerted by a motion sensor linked to their surveillance cameras, and they were able to arm themselves just seconds before their door was kicked in.
The suspects quickly fled the scene in a gray car before officers arrived.
I think that guy just set a new 40 time.
He did. It was quick. He was quick out of the gate.
Very quickly.
Quick out of the gate. And one thing I wanted to add, just getting back to the incapacitate someone.
Yeah.
Especially with handguns, which is what the majority of folks are using. They've done studies on incapacitation, if you will. And varies by the study, just like everything else we've talked about, but somewhere between 70 to 85% of people who are incapacitated when they get shot, it's a psychological stop.
Right.
So you don't want to count on it, right? So in order to physically incapacitate someone, especially with a handgun, you have to hit their central nervous system, right? That's the only way. So other than that, it's either they bleed out or they quit.
Right.
So,
and that's something too,
you can't count on it.
Right, which we'll touch on the technical myths in the next installment, which I would recommend you click below, or just you can go through the playlist where you'll get some people saying this. Well, they'll say, well, 20 more people are killed by 22s. Well, that's true. But if someone is killed, or it could be true. Right. In other words, it can be just as lethal. But if you die 4 hours later in the emergency room, something you may not, like, you can get a lot of raping done.
You sure can.
Especially if you're wearing your old lucky raping slacks. In those 4 hours time. So it's about that, like you're saying, that central nervous system shock, incapacitating trauma. And usually that's either actual neurological damage or immediate blood loss, as opposed to something lethal. Because you can get pierced through a lung and still go on for a while.
Absolutely. And aside from rape, they can be holding a gun, squeezing the trigger at you.
Exactly.
So that's probably more important in that instance.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, both tomato. They both seem unpleasant.
They do. I agree with that.
I'd rather be shot than face old Rapey McRaperson's lucky raping slacks. I mean, I tell you what, I have heard stories and I don't want to take part. But that'll bring us actually to the next installment, the technical myths. So hopefully this has helped inform you, enlighten you. If you like it, click the like button, subscribe, comment below which myth you run into the most and where you've heard it. Because we've been through this. This is kind of remedial. We've done these as different videos in the past, but we wanted to compile them as a reference piece and always make the references available to you so that you can dive in a little bit deeper. And I highly recommend looking into that study regarding, you being more likely to have your firearm used against you. It's very eye-opening.
Flawed is an understatement.
Yes, it's an understatement. And you think, well, there must be others. No, there really aren't. That's what will often happen. It will come from one piece of cherry-picked information from a flawed study that then becomes something that is repeated.
Yeah, everyone knows that's true.
Yeah, everyone knows that's true. Everyone knows that you're more likely to have your firearm used against you. And then you just think, well, hold on a second. How would that happen? Do you have any idea how hard it would be to Steven Seagal your gun against you?
It's slightly more difficult than in the movies.
Yes,
slightly.
Especially if you have your lucky raping slacks on. So we'll see you in the next installment, Technical Myths with Mrgunsngear. Check out his YouTube channel. This man knows far more about firearms. Well, he's forgotten more than we'll ever know. And see you in that next installment, Gun Week. If you like this video, click like, consider subscribing, or comment below. And of course, consider tuning in to the live show, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on this channel.